we've got this roadblock as long as a small, well, I call them cabal in the book, who are the hardcore of the shadow government that everyone talks about, which I also talk about in the book, refuse to come clean, and I think that they're going to have to come clean at some stage, and Congress is the organization that's going to have to force them to do that.
And your book is very comprehensive because you talk about all of these and the way we should approach other civilizations in the world. And you use as the most powerful phrase the golden rule. Can you give us some ideas how we can change our worldview so that we are not a warring species killing each other, we are not judgmental over people that do not look like us or live like us? Can you imagine if it were aliens? And how can you give us some ideas how this can be accomplished? Because I know this is your passion.
Well, I think we live in an unhappy world where many things are going wrong, and I start my book out by saying I think we have about 10 years to turn around and convert from fossil fuels to a new exotic energy or energies, not the 30 or 40 years that all the politicians are talking about, because that, in my opinion, will probably be too late. And the global warming will proceed to the point where some countries are devastated, like Bangladesh, for example, which could wind up underwater, and many of the Pacific Islands, and maybe eventually Manhattan, who knows. And so we're headed hell-bent for our own destruction if we don't change. And yet you go back and read history, and I have a section on this, of almost every major religion at some stage has taken on some other major religion and attempted to kill them off, or some of them, while at the same time proclaiming in their basic rules that they believe in treating other people the way they would want to be treated. And yet in action, they do just the opposite. And I'm calling for a year of forgiveness, where all of the people who have fought others over the last 2,000 years or more forgive whoever did it, and it's two ways in almost every case, and then start cooperating in building the kingdom of God, which I define as a world where everybody has enough to eat, and some clean water to drink, and a roof over their head, and enough clothes to be decent, and sufficient access to education to give them a reasonable opportunity to be able to use their skills creatively. And this would produce really the kind of world that we all talk about and dream about and hope about, but do very little about. And it's interesting, if you want to go back to the UFO thing for a minute, that one of the early Canadian pioneers in this field, Wilbur Smith, who had access to information from the star visitors, as some of us like to call them, said that we've reached the stage, and certainly he got this from them, where we have to choose between good and evil. And if we keep on doing evil against our fellow man, in the generic sense, the world is doomed. Whereas if, on the other hand, we were to choose doing good in all of the ways that are open to us, and especially with all of this technology, then we could create a world which would be absolutely stunning in the opportunities that it provides for everyone. So this is the point that we're at, and I think the extraterrestrials are very, very interested in which way we go, whether we go forward, which I would say was the way of cooperation, or whether we just keep on saying, well, my power or my wish to be president of this country or to be the dictator of this country or whatever is such and so strong, and I have such a reason for it that I'll be glad to use armed forces to kill my enemies and lock them up if they get too powerful, and so on. In other words, the things that we've been doing and are still continuing to do in many parts of the world.
Your book is very, very personal. The area of the exotic alternatives to fossil fuels, the area of world political cooperation using the golden rules, because you tend to put yourself in the other person's moccasins, and the revamping of the planetary monetary system, and transparency in government. Of those things I mentioned, can you talk to me about the one issue that's near and dear to your heart, and finally tell us how maybe we could fix it?
Well, the issue that is most urgent at the moment is changing the world monetary system, the banking system. And this is a long story, and I know you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it is critically important. The banking system that we have is, to put it bluntly, legalized fraud, to put it in bold terms. And we have to change it for the benefit of all. There are many things in my book that you will know from having read it, where I talk about the world being run by a very small group of elite people who are immensely wealthy and who want to stay that way. They want to have the stranglehold on the resources and the wealth of the world. And so they have introduced globalization, which really hasn't benefited anybody except them in a tangible way. And they want to keep a banking system which has brought more than 25 recessions and depressions in the United States in the last 120 years. And now, after one of the most serious meltdowns, the most serious meltdown since the Great Depression, they're pretending that they're fixing the system when they're not. It's just a pretense. And they're pretending to slap the hands of the bankers who are responsible for it, and it is just a tap in the hand. It's like finding a prostitute $20 for being on the street, knowing that she's going to go back out the next night and earn more than that. And the banks are doing exactly the same thing. They're just laughing all the way to their balls. So this is a profound area. Maybe it might be interesting if I could just go through a bit of the history in maybe 3 or 4 minutes or 5. I just go back to the time when King William was fighting a war and ran out of money. Somebody said, well, one way to get some more money is to start a bank. So he got the rich people of England to subscribe £1,200,000 in gold and silver and lend it all to the government at 8%, which is a pretty high interest rate for a government guaranteed loan. But that's the way things go. And then to show their gratitude, the government allowed the bank to print another £1,200,000 in banknotes and lend it to their friends at high interest rates. So in other words, they were allowed to lend the same money twice. Well then, over the years, through the greed of the bankers and the cooperation, use a polite word, of politicians, that ratio has increased dramatically. In the early years of the 20th century, the federal banks in the United States had to have a gold reserve of 25%, which meant that they could lend the same money 4 times. In my early years in Canada, they had to have a cash reserve of 8%, which meant they could lend the same money 12.5 times. And today, with this new system of capital adequacy, which isn't really adequacy at all, it should be capital inadequacy, they are lending the same money 20 times and collecting interest on it each time. Now that is just legalized fraud. And the fact that a tiny minority of rich people can get away with it, I think, is a disgrace. So I've been saying we have to reduce that ratio of 20 to 1 to, say, 3 to 1, and reduce the amount of the proportion of money that banks create from nearly a monopoly to, I'm suggesting, 2/3, so that governments who own the patent on behalf of the people can print 1/3 of the money, 34% is the figure that I use in the book, and use that to balance their budgets and pay for health care and pay for the transition from an oil economy to something that would save the world from global warming.